All right, when you hear the phrase company's value, what's the first thing you think of? It's probably the stock price, right? But that's really just scratching the surface. What about the trillions of dollars in super complex assets that are actually inside the company? Things like obscure bonds and investments that don't have a neat little price tag you can just look up online. Well, in the financial world, trying to put a number on these is called fair value. And as we're about to see, that process is, well, it's anything but straightforward.
So, to get this fair value, a company goes out and hires a third-party expert. Simple enough. But what happens if that expert comes back with a number that the company really doesn't like? Think of it this way. Imagine you're selling your house and the appraiser comes in with a super low number. What's your first instinct? You're probably not just going to accept it, right? You're going to shop around for a second opinion. Well, it turns out that's pretty much exactly what can happen in the corporate world. A company can just switch to a new expert, hoping and maybe expecting to get a better number. This practice has a name, and it's called opinion shopping. And as some researchers recently discovered, this isn't just some hypothetical thing. It's a very real strategy, and it's happening a lot, especially inside the massive U.S. life insurance industry.
Okay, so here's what tipped off the researchers. They noticed something kind of weird. Life insurance companies, which hold literally trillions of dollars in these complex bonds, were constantly switching up their valuation experts. It just kept happening. And that raised a huge question. Why? Were they just trying to find the most accurate price possible? Or was something else going on behind the scenes? So first, let's get on the same page about this term, fair value. Look, for a share of, say, Apple stock, it's easy. The price is right there, updated every second. But for a really complicated, rarely traded bond, there is no single perfect number. It's not a fact, it becomes an opinion. It's an expert's best guess. And here's the crucial part. Different experts can have some pretty wildly different opinions. And that brings us to the one thing that every company desperately wants to avoid. It's a mouthful, but it's called an other than temporary impairment, or OTTI. And what that means is it's an official declaration that one of your assets has permanently tanked in value. When that happens, the company has to report it as a loss. This looks awful on their financial statements, and it sets off all kinds of red flags with regulators. So yeah, avoiding an OTTI is a very strong motivator.
So if a company is switching its expert, why are they doing it? The researchers really focused on two possible motives, two competing stories to explain this behavior. One is perfectly honest, and the other is, let's just say, a bit more opportunistic. Okay, so on one side, you've got the seeking accuracy motive. This is the good guy, right? The company is just trying to get the most precise, truthful price so its reports are perfect. But on the other side, you've got the seeking a higher price motive. And here, the company isn't looking for the truest price. They're hunting for the highest price they can get, specifically to dodge that painful loss we were just talking about. On this quote from the study really nails it. Because all these different experts give different price estimates, a gap opens up. And it's in that gap that managers get what the researchers call latitude. Basically, the wiggle room to pick the opinion that works best for them. The opportunity to go opinion shopping is kind of built right into the system. So you've got these two competing motives. How in the world do you figure out which one is actually driving the bus? Well, this is where the research gets really, really clever. They set up a test, a trap, really, to force these two motives into a head-on collision, just to see which one would win out when they point in totally opposite directions. Here's the scenario they looked for. Step 1. Find a bond where the price the company originally paid for it, that's the book value, is the highest number in this equation. Step 2. The company's current expert says it's worth less than that. That's the fair value. Okay, so the company is already on the hook for a potential loss. But then, step 3, and this is the kicker. The average price from all the experts out there in the market, the consensus, is even lower than what their own expert is telling them. You see the conflict here? It's perfect. If your goal is accuracy, the good motive, you should switch to an expert who will give you a lower price to get you closer to what the rest of the market thinks is true. But if your goal is to avoid a loss, the opportunistic motive, you do the exact opposite. You'd find an expert who will give you a higher price, moving you further away from the market's truth, but closer to the price you originally paid. So this is it, the moment of truth. When a company is standing at this fork in the road, and accuracy says go left, but self-interest says go right, which path do they take? Yep,
The opportunistic motive wins. Overwhelmingly, the data showed that insurers are far more likely to switch to a valuer who gives them a higher price, even when that price completely flies in the face of what the rest of the market is saying. At the end of the day, the need to avoid reporting a loss was just a much stronger pull than the need to be accurate.
Okay, so now we know that shopping for a higher price is what's really going on. But the next big question is, does it actually work? I mean, what are the real-world results of doing this?
And the impact is pretty dramatic. Just look at this. For these high-risk assets, if a company doesn't switch its expert, there's a pretty high chance it's going to have to report a loss. But for the companies that do switch to a more favorable, higher valuation, whoosh, that likelihood just plummets. It is an incredibly effective strategy. And here it is. This is the punchline statistic from the whole study. For those assets that are most at risk of being written down as a loss, successfully shopping for a higher opinion cuts the chances of having to report that loss by an average of 50%. That's not a tiny little effect. That's a game changer. Bottom line, opinion shopping works. The study also figured out the perfect recipe for when this behavior is most likely to pop up. It happens more when a company is already financially weak, when the asset in question is a huge piece of their portfolio, when the asset itself is super murky and hard to value, and, this one's key, when they think nobody, like an auditor or a regulator, is looking over their shoulder too closely. So you might be thinking, okay, that's a clever accounting trick, but this is way more than that. Let's talk about why this financial loophole has much, much broader implications for all of us. You know, our entire financial system is basically built on a foundation of trust. We trust that the numbers companies are reporting are, real. They're accurate. But when companies can just pick and choose the facts that make them look the best, it starts to wear away at that trust. It hides potential risks that are bubbling just under the surface. So what's the damage? Well, first, it means financial statements just aren't as reliable as we think they are. Second, it lets companies basically kick the can down the road, hiding or delaying very real financial problems. And third, it kind of makes a joke out of the whole idea of an objective third-party expert. I mean, if you can just keep hiring people until one of them gives you the answer you want, how objective is that process, really? And this is the final, pretty stark conclusion from the researchers themselves. That freedom to switch your expert doesn't just allow for this opportunistic behavior, it actively leads to it. And the result is lower quality, less reliable financial information for everybody. And I'll just leave you with this final thought to chew on. This entire study was only possible because the insurance industry is forced to disclose who their valuation sources are. But what about all the other industries that don't have those strict transparency rules? If opinion shopping is happening this often in a place where we can actually see it, just imagine where else it might be going on, completely in the dark.